Season's greetings and thank you so much. I hope that most of you have enjoyed their festive season. In our feature today, we have a brand new feature, exciting news, I must say. We're going to be educated about the law aspect in as far as sport is concerned. Without any waste of time dwelling much on that, we have an expert in our studio to share with us, educate us in as far as those aspects are concerned. My guest here is Farai Razano. Welcome to Biggie on Sport. He's a practice attorney. He has a practice around Johannesburg. He'll be sharing with us about all the work is done by his practice. Once again, welcome, sir, to Biggie on Sport.
Hi, Biggie. Thank you for having me on the show, and I'm looking forward to it.
As I've said in my introduction, you are an attorney by profession, and you're running a lot of activities in as far as your practice is concerned. And amongst those activities, it is sport. Tell us more about your practice as well as about yourself as an individual. Just give us a brief bio.
Thank you very much. I always tell this story because, that's what brought me close to sports law mainly. I'm a hopelessly untalented sports person, so I always fancied myself as a goalkeeper in primary school. That didn't happen, and I had to get somewhere close to sport. So after completing my Bachelor of Laws degree, in fact, I was going to do environmental law, but then I stumbled across this law in sport. In fact, I shadowed a gentleman who did a lot of football law work. He's still a very good friend of mine, and he's still my mentor and so forth. And so I used that opportunity to stay very close to sport as much as I can. And that's how I ended up in sports law.
And as Farai, looking at your structure, you come across as a sport participating person. You look as a person who's actively involved in sport. Let's share with the viewers what inspired you to venture in becoming attorney in the world of sport.
Well, like any other field, you try and carve a niche for yourself. You don't want to be a jack of all trades and a master of none. So after completing my degree, as I said, I shadowed this gentleman, and then I realized that, well, there could be an area that one could specialize in. And during those days, I think the debate mainly was about, well, there's no such thing as sports law, it's sports and the law. And this is a debate that has gone on forever. Even now, it's still there, but at least people are more receptive on this idea of sports law being an area of law that you specialize and you pay attention more to the sports regulations than just applying the law in general. And as someone who always had an avid interest in sport, I thought that was a good way of trying to enjoy work. They all say you need to enjoy what you do, you need to love your work. So that's how I got close to that. At that time, I had never been formally trained in sports law, as it were, because it's a myriad of laws that you apply, paying attention to sports law itself. But later on, I then went on to acquire a formal qualification in a master's in sports law, just to add credence to this claim that there is sports law. So in a nutshell, that's what it's about. It's applying your general law, but with a particular attention to sport, because sport is always treated as a specific area. And we can go on with examples, but examples I can give is like, if you look at like laws against discrimination, for example, you can't discriminate between men and women. But in sport, you have competitions that are only men only, women only. You can't discriminate on the basis of age, but then you have these age category competitions, that sort of things. You can't restrict certain movements and so forth. But in sport, you have, unlike, I could just pick up from my employer and say, I resign, I'm leaving. But a person who's playing football or cricket who's registered for that season can't just pick up and leave as they please. So those are the nuances that then give this area of law, as a specialist area of law, that those who practice in it then claim to be experts in sports law.
Farai, what is the days like for someone like you in as far as sport is concerned?
Well, it's not as hilarious as some would think, that as they've watched on TV, that are walking in a shiny suit and the phone is ringing nonstop, that sort of thing. Sometimes it depends with what's happening because you have various facets of the practice. You have the regulatory aspect, you have the commercial aspect, you have the litigation aspect, and then you have other things. So it just depends on what's happening on that day. If obviously you are litigating, you are getting ready to go to court, and so probably when you walk in, you're looking for your files, and you need to be sure that all your documents are ready and that sort of thing. You need to be sure who you're going to, or not even court, because I'll come to that, because sports has this thing of private dispute resolution. But the idea is if you're litigating, you're going to court or to a tribunal, those are things you're worrying about. If the day is mainly a commercial thing, you're probably walking into a meeting. Nowadays, there's Zoom, you join the Zoom call. There are people negotiating on the other side. You're frustrated because the comma and the full stop is in the wrong place, that sort of thing. Or if it's a regulatory thing, which probably most of the times it is in my practice, people are fighting about their federations or their sports governing body. You haven't submitted this, or you didn't comply with this. You're being charged, that sort of thing. So, but the point is, you could have all those in a single day. You're busy trying to prepare for a hearing tomorrow, and then the phone is ringing. This person wants to know this, and can they charge us? How can we deal with this? At the same time, another client of yours is looking for commercial advice on this sort of thing. And so it varies depending on what you are up to on that day. If it's a purely, like I said, hearing or arbitration day, you probably then leave and spend your day in the arbitration room, or nowadays on Zoom, debating these issues.
We have a myriad of sport codes, if not activities, in South Africa. We have football, we have cricket, we have rugby, etc., etc. Amongst those sporting codes, which one actually has put you in a space whereby you need to work harder and more in as far as tackling the issues?
And I'll speak from my experience. My practice, even though I do a lot of sports law across fields, the majority of that work is in football.
Okay.
And I think it's because football, and I hate to say this, some other sporting codes might feel aggrieved, but football is probably ahead in terms of money and so forth. And in a South African perspective,
money, commercial aspect.
Yeah, commercial aspects.
Okay.
And in a South African context, it's probably the most followed sport anyway. So that's where most of my work is. And then I do work with other sporting codes or sporting disciplines. And from the football aspect, you probably will deal with all these aspects in a single day, because I have various clients. So depending on whether I'm acting for a player or a club, or sometimes the sports governing body and that sort of thing, everyone is asking you about different things on the go. And sometimes you even learn, like in the morning, someone called and said, yeah, how could we regulate this? And then by 5 o'clock, your normal 9 to 5 thing, you get a call and you're like, this is somehow related to the earlier call in the morning. And so that also comes an aspect of you need to constantly monitor potential conflicts and that sort of thing. At the same time, you need to constantly monitor just dishing out free advice, because everything is always like a scenario. What could happen if? But that is actually happening somewhere, but it comes in as a what could happen if.
As the cliche says, more money, more problems. What sort of common problems do you come across in the space itself of football that you had to tackle that is over and over time?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure if that's really accurate, because some of the problems don't relate to money per se.
Okay.
But as I said, there's the regulatory, commercial, and so forth and so forth. Yeah, there are money issues when it's commercial aspects, sponsorships, image rights, and so forth, depending on the code. Because in a team setup like football, mainly there's this issue of image rights, who owns them, blah, 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 that sort of thing. So those tend to come up with probably the more commercialized disputes. But then most of them are still issues, and this does not apply to football, lest I be misquoted. In sports in general, there's still issues that do not really relate to money, which is probably the administrative part of it, the professionalization of the sport. So you may have more problems where the sports governing body is trying to professionalize, or it's trying to regulate as much as it can. while the participants are still lagging behind. And sometimes it's not because they don't want the regulation or they're trying to resist, but sometimes it's because the system is just moving too fast. So if you take any sporting code, you definitely have a professional layer, you have an amateur layer, and then you have like the mix in between where it's sort of semi-professional. Everyone is trying. I'm still playing in the lower division, which is supposed to be an amateur league, but I'm gearing up for professional if I get promoted. And the regulations then start intertwining, and it starts bringing all sorts of issues that it's not really a money issue, but it's about the functioning of the system itself. So that's one primary aspect. Then the other one sometimes mainly relates to discipline, contravention of the regulations and so forth. So even though the participant is not really trying to get more money or the SGB trying to get more money, these are issues that come almost every day. And obviously, as you said, the more money, more problems. The commercial aspect in the professional setup, there's a lot that goes on behind the doors or outside the stadium that some people would not even realize in terms of commercial partnerships and all that, clubs or SGBs negotiating these contracts in some instances for 18 months, and people don't know that, but almost like every second day you get asked for an opinion on, oh, we want to do this, how does this relate to the regulations, to the law, and then laws such as the Consumer Protection Act, POPI Act, the Protection of Personal Information Act, and so forth.
Yeah. You are watching Biggie on Sport, and this is our brand new feature where we have integrated a law aspect feature to learn more what does the aspect of law have to say in as far as sport is concerned. My guest here, it is Farai Razano from Razano Attorneys, based in Johannesburg. They do a myriad of practices. A lot of cases are there, but amongst them, it is sport that we are tackling right now. Attorneys represent agencies, they represent players, they look at contract disputes, they look at salary caps and so forth. What are the most challenges in as far as what I've mentioned is concerned that you come across on a daily basis? From across the entire sporting code, be it cricket, be it rugby, be it football.
Yeah, so I think if I were to rank them, probably the first one is the regulatory aspect, complying with the rules and so forth.
Okay.
And then the second one would be probably player or participant contracts. And then the third one would probably be the other aspect, which is the commercial aspect of it, whether you're doing contracts or you're litigating between your clients and their partners and that sort of thing. I find this, especially in my practice, because the other aspects, even though, as I said, sometimes contracts are negotiated over 18 months or so, they are not the daily thing that happens, whereas the regulatory aspect is happening almost every second day, because week in, week out, there are competitions or there's competition, and you'd find that there are all sorts of things that the participants have to comply with. There are all sorts of things that the regulators have to comply with, the whole Safety at Sports and Recreational Events Act issues, the whole consumer protection issues, and so forth. So that tends to dominate from my aspect, whether it's the participants and their respective SGBs or leagues trying to make sure that they comply, or where there's non-compliance, there are then disciplinary issues and so forth, and also non-compliance with the laws, because that's where this issue of sports law kind of comes, because you're not only concerned with legislation as in your acts of parliament or common law. There are all sorts of these regulations that come into play, and some of them are intertwined in a way that the rules of the NSL, for example, would refer to SAFA, CAF, and FIFA. So you're not only looking at one aspect. If there's an aspect to look at, what does the SAFA one say? What does the CAF one say, one does the FIFA one say, and that tends to take a lot of time, and this applies across sporting courts. So that you are bound to deal with an issue like that almost every day. And then the other one that probably interests a lot of people more is, especially in team sport, is this issue of contracts, player contracts, and so forth. And this normally happens either towards the end of the season, when people have to move, or at the beginning of the season when people are still moving. Very seldom during the season, unless if there's been a breach by either party, whether the club or the franchise has not paid the people, and then they raise issues. But those don't happen almost on a daily basis, as many people would assume.
This interview comes in the backdrop of one PSL club incident. I think we spoke about off the record, but I want you to talk in general, just making a study case about the team itself. We all know that Real AM is going through hard time right now. They've been visited by SARS and so forth. They're facing issues. In your position as an attorney, perhaps in a situation of Real AM, what can you say to them? What can you advise them? I know that, I don't want to prolong my question, but I know that before FIFA, before CAS, which is the court of sport, sport whatever, or athletics, CAS, yeah, and then what advice can you give to Real AM?
Well, there's always a danger in giving advice without all the facts. So what I say here is what you and I have read.
That's why I said let's generalize.
Yeah. What you and I have read in the newspapers, there might be some nuances,
factual,
that are different. But if you look, and I think what you're referring to was that Nerkovic situation.
Yes, Nerkovic, the striker, who was owed millions and millions of rents, they failed to honor that, yes.
So these things don't happen overnight. That's one thing that people need to be aware of. So it starts with the contracting. Obviously, the parties committed to certain things towards each other. They had to comply with that. Along the way, one party did not comply, which would be the club. And then the player would have approached the dispute resolution tribunal that, and in sports, again, this is where it gets a bit tricky, because there are those that you agree to, there are those that are in terms of the rules. So if you and I have an issue, I can just rush off to the Johannesburg Magistrates Court and so forth. But in sport, there are these rules that you must go to either the PSL, SAFA, or
those
FIFA.
Channels.
There are channels. I think in that case, there might have been an unhappiness on the side of the club that there was a PSL DRC, that matter did not sit there. That's what I've read in the newspapers. That matter went straight to the FIFA Football Tribunal in the form of the Dispute Resolution Chamber. They rendered an award, which the club had to comply with, but the club appealed to CAS. And as I understand it, that appeal was not, so an award was rendered. Instead of complying with it, they did not. And then when you do not comply with an award, the matter can be referred to the FIFA disciplinary committee. And what generally is happening now, back in the day, it would take much longer because the DRC would issue an award, render an award. Then if the club did not comply with the player, depending on whoever the award is against, that matter would go back, and the DRC would then forward that matter to the disciplinary committee, because that's how you get sanctioned. That's how the issue of whether it's points deduction, you can't register players and so forth come. But nowadays, that award would come with, you must pay within 45 days or whatever number of days, failing which there would be a player registration ban that is imposed on your club.
On the club.
And so you can see that it's not something that just happens overnight. That award would have come, they would have not honored it, and then the player registration ban would have kicked in. And as I understand it, at some stage, they then tried to appeal, but then the appeal was out of time, and I stand to be corrected. Then they sought a provisional stay of the award. So basically what you do when you go to the courts of arbitration for sport, you can say to them, your appeal does not suspend the operation of
the club,
the operation of that award or that player registration ban. But you can then in your papers say, while that is going on, can you please suspend this? So you can, instead of waiting for us to pay, we have appealed, let us be allowed to register players as we go. So they sought that provisional relief that was not granted, and so they could not register players. At the same time, the money that they have to pay the player is still accumulating interest, albeit at like a 5% or somewhere there in terms of the FIFA rules. So that's the long story about it. It doesn't happen overnight. And for you to get there has to be some non-compliance. And from there, if you want to appeal against the CAS ruling or the CAS award, you have to go before the Swiss Federal Tribunal. And in fact, maybe this is for another day, but just 3 days ago, there was an opinion that was rendered by an advocate before the European Court of Justice saying those awards should be reviewed by courts in terms of national laws. So, but as it stands, once the case renders an award, if you want to appeal, you must go before the Swiss Federal Tribunal. But that case, which is interesting, I've just seen the summary of the opinion, would then make it that if you try to enforce it in South Africa, for example, I can still ask the South African court to say they got it wrong and they can review. But that's probably for the future. For now, just to get back to what we're talking about, that's the avenue they would have to follow for them to try and get that award rescinded or overturned. But in sports, whether it's a downside or upside is that, unlike if you get a judgment against me, you still go back to the court, issue a writ of execution, send the sheriff to attach my bicycle and all those things. In sports, it can be enforced through the rules. That's why it looks like it's very quick there. So FIFA will then impose the player registration ban. If that's not working, it could be reconsidered by the FIFA disciplinary committee. That could lead in a points deduction and so forth.
Ferre, I know you can't speak on behalf of the teams because Royal EM are no exception to this. There are other teams within the top flight football fraternity, which I may not mention their names. At some stage, they were also barred from registering players because of certain misgivings. They did not comply to, they did not heed a call in as far as FIFA is concerned. Why are these teams, management, so resistant to honor what they're supposed to? Because it looks like it's a common practice. Like I said, it's not Royal AM. I know I read an article a few weeks ago, Marumo Gallants, in fact, are coming out to say we're going to honor what FIFA has requested or has imposed on us and check if we can pay that particular player so that we can be eligible and be able to register players. It looks like it's a common practice within the PSL. Why are these managements so resistant? Why?
From my experience in sport, I think, so you have all sorts of dispute resolution that you could try. You could try mediation before you go to arbitration, where basically mediation is like coming around the table, trying to find solutions. No one wins. There's a settlement that's reached there, and there's a cliche that we say a good settlement is one where both parties walk away unhappy. If one party walks away happy, you must know they snatched a bargain. So both parties walk away unhappy.
Unhappy.
Yes. So, but in sports, what I've realized is that I think it's the culture of sport, because sport is about winning. It's not about, let's square, let's be all walk away unhappy. It's about winning. So every issue is approached with, I must win. I must not be seen to have lost. I must not be seen to be weak. I must not be seen to have chickened out. And that's what happens when some of these disputes arise. And from my experience, you would have rival parties that they take their rivalry from the stadium or the pitch. And when you advise that, let's just reach a compromise, it's not easy to get that because it will be seen as we lost to that side. And that carries on to these labor disputes where if a club or if a player, because it's mainly players and coaches that will refer these disputes to and that result in these bans. If a player half the time probably is deemed as he's not good enough, or he's not delivering what he was supposed to deliver, then he's not paid, or they negotiate to try and cut his salary. He says, no, I'm not going anywhere, I'm not cutting my salary. And then it ends up with, well, then do what you want. And then when the player refers a dispute or the coach refers a dispute, it will then become, well, he thinks he's going to win against us. That's not going to happen. So this spirit or this culture of you must win at all costs, I think is one of the contributing factors in sport. It leads to that even where there's a case that maybe management could look at and say, well, you know what, we were wrong, let's just pay and move on. There's this thing of we can't be seen to have lost. And that's, to me, this is not science, but that's my observation over the years, that sometimes there's a matter that you could simply, let's settle. It's not settled because, there's this thing of we must win, and maybe the more colloquial term to use is like there are these egos that are involved. In sport. Yeah. So it's a matter of, look, let's just see how far we can push this. Sometimes there's hope that, they'll just look the other way and that's the end. But we have seen, like you said, it's not only Royal AM that has been subject to a player registration ban, but some other clubs, like you said, known to us because these things have been reported in the newspaper. I think the journalists are even doing a good job now. They now check that FIFA player registration ban thing. I think for the past 3-4 years, people are doing that. Before that, some of these things would just go under the radar. No one would even know, because once you get to that stage, clubs have to make a commercial decision and say, do we keep fighting or we just pay, this thing gets removed? Those are some of the cases. And then some cases, you won't believe it, but it's there. There are administrative bungles that just happen. An award is rendered, the days to pay come, but no one in the office is paying attention. And when the letter comes saying, oh, the player registration ban has now been effected, everyone wakes up. I've seen that, not only for a South African club or South African clubs, I've seen it for some other clubs outside South Africa I've done work for. And then they send an SOS, what should we do? And when you read the papers, like, oh, just pay. As soon as you pay, you send proof of payment. And that's it.
That's it. I'm about to let you go, and I wanted us to touch on young players such as Relebohile, as an example, Mofokeng, in terms of player representation, like being represented in terms of their affairs. But I think we'll pick up on this one in our next segment. You're doing a sterling work, and I'm about to let you go. I would like you to speak to the rest of the world about the work that you do apart from sport itself. In short, sell your practice to the world as to what is it that you offer in as far as your services are concerned.
Well, thank you, Biggie. So my practice primarily focuses on 4 areas, which is sports, entertainment, employment law, labor law, and immigration law. Of those 4 areas, the big ones or the main ones are sports and entertainment. Employment or labor law is an add-on because of the nature of sport. There's always employments and so forth. And immigration, you can't run away from that because sports teams or clubs are always bringing in talent from outside the country. The same applies on the entertainment sector. There's always issues that relates to immigration that come into the fray. So those are the 4 areas of practice that we specialize in.
And if anyone would like to get hold of you, how can they go about doing that? Are you on social media? Do you have any contacts or somebody would like to reach out to you?
I think the best place to check is our website, which is www.razanolow.co.za. And then the other way is to contact us via email. The email addresses are displayed on the website, but I'm quite happy if people contact me directly at farai@razanolow.co.za, or they can call me on 084-211-0055. Sorry.
There you have it. That is Attorney Farai Razano from Razane Attorneys in Johannesburg. He was our studio guest to unpack, educate, and enlighten us in as far as how does the law play its part in as far as sport is concerned. We leave it at that for today. Thank you so much for watching. Once again, my name is Biggie on Sport. We're looking forward to see you once again. Thank you to Jimmy Mashazi and Nontlantla Ngomane behind the scenes, as well as the technical guys at JD Art 24 Studios down in North Cliff for their sterling work in making sure that they bring good quality pictures or images as well as a good sound. Don't forget to like, share, but above all, to subscribe on our various episodes. Thank you so much. Sharp, sharp.